What is up, everyone? ABQ Business Podcast. This is Jason Rigby, your host. I'm super excited today. We have an amazing guest, one that wrote a book, self-help memoir called One Hit Wonder, the real life adventures of an average guy and the lessons he learned along the way. Author, entrepreneur, Aspire software co-founder, and a cancer survivor, which we're going to get into today. Kevin Kehoe, how are you doing today?
Very good, Jason. Doing well. Thank you for having me on.
Yes, I want to get into the name. We all know what that one-hit wonder is. What was the name and how did it come about using that?
It's actually the One Hit Wonder is a title of a chapter in the book, and I just liked the way it sounded for a title on the front of a book. Right? It just caught me right when I looked at it. But the story goes to a time when at Aspire, we got our first office, right? We grew very quickly and we were putting together a lunch. We only had 10 people at the time, and we were trying to figure out how to do a PowerPoint on the screen on our brand new TV. And of course, we're a tech company. No one can figure out how to make the thing work. And so we're intermittently going back and forth between TV and radio, and a song came on through the internet radio, and I knew it, and I asked who wrote that song because I couldn't place the name, and a guy across the room said, well, that's so-and-so. They were a real one-hit wonder. And I teased him, and I said, so how many hits do you have? He looked at me funny, and I said, no, seriously, how many hits do you have? And he just started laughing. I said, because I know what? I got none. I said, I would kill to be a one-hit wonder, to do something that all those years later, someone would recognize you, that you did it and you wrote the song. And I said, isn't that a great thing? And then I just continued on a little bit, and I said, that's what I'd love for us to do, right? For us to be able to produce a piece of software that is so good that years later we can all sit down having, who knows, umbrella drinks at a bar somewhere in Hawaii and say, look at what we did. Wasn't that wonderful? So that's kind of where it all came from.
I love it. I love the name. I think it's real catchy, and I think it best describes what we aspire to do in our life. And I kind of want to start off, before we get too philosophical in that, I want to start off because you've been over 30, close to 40 years as an entrepreneur.
35 for sure, yeah.
Yes, and so I want to kind of start off from the early years, if you don't mind. Let's start off on that special day, your special day, February 7th, 1955. Queens, New York. What was it like in 1955 in Queens, New York, with your family, your mom and dad?
No real memory of 55, but I have a great memory of the first couple of years in New York before we moved out to Long Island. Ultimately, there were 6 kids, and, I was the first of 6 living in an apartment in Queens, and apparently the story goes I was pretty rambunctious, and the superintendent was wondering when my mother and my father would leave. So we finally did. And so I grew up in Long Island, in the early 60s, where really I have my memory. New York Yankee fan, Mickey Mantle, Catholic school, choir boy, altar boy, really kind of a great childhood. And ultimately went to school in a place called Smithtown, which is out on Long Island, and graduated from that in about 1973. So, Catholic school, pretty strict upbringing, good parents, good brothers and sisters. We're all still pretty tight right now. So it really was pretty good growing up.
Was it, I know you have an Irish descent, was it middle class, upper middle class, lower middle class, especially in those beginning years?
Yeah,
what did your dad do?
I would say, money was always tight when we grew up. My father was in the insurance business, not in the sales end. He worked in the back of the house stuff.
Right.
He took the train into Manhattan every day of his life for 36, 37 years. And my mother was really stay at home until I was probably in high school, when she went out and she ended up being the exec secretary for the chief of police in Suffolk County, New York. And so I would say money was always tight where we were, but, we didn't lack for really anything. I think some of that actually played a lot into my later life, my relationship with money. and making it and, working on your own and being independent.
Yeah, I love that. 1959, you went to an elementary school, and I know in your book, you wrote about Miss Hankin. Is that her last name?
Yeah, Mrs. Hankin.
What, like, whenever you think of Woodward Park Elementary School and you think of a teacher that influenced your life, what are some of the examples or some of the things that you could, share with others, whether it's bad or whether it's good, about what you learned in that process?
You mean through my elementary school years and all that?
Yes, sir.
Yes. I mean, I've had both good and bad teachers. Listen, I was raised with nuns really until 8th grade when we moved, and I ended up in public school and went to public school, high school. And, quite a different experience, I will say that, going from one to the other. Very strict, type of schooling. Learned a lot. And I think in high school, it was quite different for me coming from an environment of Catholic school, coming to a public school. We were always taught that barbarians went to public school. And of course, that wasn't the actuality when I finally got there. I remember really a couple of good teachers. I think I wrote about one in the book, Mr. Francino, who was my social studies teacher. Another guy I had, Elliot Slotnick, was my math teacher. And I think they did what all good teachers did. They took a real interest in you. They saw something, they guided you, they were nice to you. And both of them, if I look in like high school yearbook, said, to a guy who's going to have great success. And so, teachers are all over the place in my estimation, but those two, particularly a couple of nuns, Sister Alberta Marie, I thought were fantastic, right? And just the way that they were positive in the way that they taught. Because, you can get some pretty tough teachers who don't do that.
Yeah, I can imagine, especially in the 60s in Catholic school. But you were
certainly. I mean, physical punishment was still part of the game. I mean,
right.
Not like beatings, but I mean, you could get a paddle if you were a bad boy, right?
Yeah, that's not even thought of anymore. I remember those days. I was raised pretty religious, strict down south. So that there was no hesitation at all for my parents to get the belt out or whatever. You look at that, but there was one of the things that you talked about as being an experience in your life is being in the boys' choir.
One of the best experiences of my life. We sang in it's just New York City, so we sang in Lincoln Center, Carnegie Hall. We were on TV every Christmas. Obviously, we sang in the church, etc. And, Leonard Bernstein, Andrew Castellanos, Seiji Ozawa. I mean, if people are familiar with those names, they'd recognize those people as pretty famous conductors from back in those days. And, Beethoven, Mahler, Benjamin Britten, that type of music. One of my favorites was the Ode to Joy, Beethoven's Ninth, where we sang the chorale part at the end. And, it was a very strict kind of practice. It was 6 days a week. We sang Mass on Sunday. We traveled, and there were 38 boys in the choir, and it was quite a deal to get selected to be in the choir. I mean, the audition process is pretty rigorous, and when I left, the gentleman who was in charge of the choir was actually from Vienna. He had conducted the Vienna Boys Choir. It was actually in a movie called Almost Angels, which was put up by Walt Disney. And if you can go back and find that somewhere, you'll find this fellow by the name of Herman Perkmoser. So it was really professional type of training, recording studios, all that stuff. It was just great. I mean, it was such a wonderful experience. I loved it. I always wanted to be in the choir.
Do you think that it helped you as an entrepreneur, especially at the public speaking side of things?
I certainly, as I mentioned in a couple of podcasts I've done, it's odd. I don't have a lot of fear about being on stage or taking risks. It's not that I'm unaware of the risk. I'm certainly not a gambler in business or anything else. But I think you're correct. I mean, I don't get stage fright in presentation. There's a story that did not make the book. But when I was at Coopers and Lybrand, which was a big 8 firm coming out of my MBA school in Dallas in 83, 84, 85, in that range there, I was in the accounting world. And I've never been a great accountant or finance person because I'm not super detailed, but we would have to do financial analysis. This is before things like even Lotus 123 existed on computer, right? We are using calculators and slide rules, etc. And all the other fellows who are in my group and the analysts doing presentations to senior execs were just petrified. And so I made a deal. I said, listen, you do all the math, I'll do all the talking. And so I ended up skipping doing all the hard work on spreadsheets because they did it all, and I was good in front of a group. That's all.
I love that. I know, Farmingdale was something that was amazing to you, and going through that, and I know you had to shift from there with your parents having 6 children. You had to shift in there, and then you went finally to the Barbarians that your nuns talked about. But why? You made it or said it was one of the sadder experiences in your life. Whenever you have, and I kind of want to correlate that with entrepreneurs, whenever you have transitions like that, and you've had several of them in your life, and they become super sad experiences, what are some of the things that you learned and some of the things that you think entrepreneurs can learn when they have to put away this part of their life?
No, that's a great question. It happens, and it happens quite frequently. And it's particularly difficult, at least in my case, with the choir, because I loved it. It was me. It's what I did. And I think one of the things that I learned and I've tried to employ is don't hang on to some of these things. When you're young, you don't realize that, as my wife said last week, I said, you don't realize that what happens in high school really doesn't matter at all. But when you're in high school, it matters everything.
Yes, 100%.
Right, it does. And so as you get a little bit older, you start to realize that this is a fairly natural thing that happens in life. And if you keep hanging on to things, then you'll never get to the new thing. And I think that's a killer for entrepreneurs, especially where we were in the tech space. Our software, which the original version was written in 2014, the whole thing had to be rewritten in 2019 because the technology, both mobile and cloud, had changed so dramatically.
Right.
And so I don't think you have the luxury as an entrepreneur hanging on to the old. I think you put it back in your memory and you like it, remember it, but then you move on to the rest, because if you don't, bad things begin to happen, like losing money, for example.
Yeah, no, I could see that 100%. It's so funny how nostalgic we are, especially in the entrepreneurial reign of things. It's like, or how we hang on to something so much and we're not willing to embrace even, creativity, even at its core is that, willing to be out of the box and think of something new. So it's always amazing to me when you talk to somebody and you could see, especially with technology, and this, how quickly it's evolving and how quickly it's moving, and then someone gets stuck, and they rely on a past experience or whatever. And I think it is like you experienced in Farmingdale. I think it's not willing to be vulnerable, not willing to be self-aware enough to handle that emotion. Because that was, one of the sadder experiences in your life at that moment.
Yeah, it was. And, and again, in retrospect, I didn't really know how to handle it. You're so young until years later when you realize it. And, I'll just say this piece. One thing, that has struck me as, I've left the business and we've sold it, is the original 10 people in that room that day when we had that one-hit wonder conversation. Each of them at some point in time has told me in some conversation, they didn't know it at the time, but those were the best days of their career ever, right? Being involved in this startup and how it was run and gun, and we were making decisions on the fly. There was not a lot of politics or, how would you say, a heavy discussion on things. You had to make decisions, how much they enjoyed it. And I said, you know what, you guys are still young. I'm 67. You guys are young. You'll have others. But I said, that was the whole point I was trying to make that day, to have that experience. that you could look back on and say, boy, could we create that somewhere else? And or it might have been a one-time thing, and just to, I don't know if the word's honor it, but to cherish it. Cherish is probably a better word.
Yeah, and you went to public high school, Smithtown Central High School, and you graduate in the top 5% of your class, which is amazing. But there was no Ivy League schools knocking on your door. Why do you think that was?
I wasn't that smart, I guess. There was a fellow in our class, his name was Bruce Fink. That was his actual name. And he got 1,600 on the SATs. He went to Harvard. I got like 1,250. And 1,250 doesn't get you into Harvard. I think, and seriously, back in those days, I think the SAT scores meant a whole lot more.
Right.
When people were selecting. So I had really good grades, but I didn't have that kind of SAT score that I think, Ivy League schools really required back in the time.
Yeah, and you went to Stony Brook. You graduated with a BA in economics and geology, but you played on the football team. And I think a lot of people I talk to that have done sports, whether it's on collegiate level, high school, whatever it may be, they reference that to understanding entrepreneurship. I know you loved that experience on the football team. Did that teamwork, the way that you had to work with teams, humility, those different things, how did that help you as far as being an entrepreneur?
I think it was all quite important. My last season, I was a captain, co-captain of the team. I never saw myself as a leader. I just played hard and I showed up every day and that type of thing. In retrospect, however, you realize, how challenging it is to get everyone on the same page to do anything in life.
Yes.
And, the idea of, I'm not sure compromise is the right word, but, part of it is persuasion and part of persuasion is listening, but still getting your point across in a situation. And I think I started learning some of that back then, is that there's a certain art to getting everyone moving in the same direction. And you can do it by force, or you could do it by, I guess, what I call leadership, persuasion. And I always felt that was a better way. Ultimately, at the end of my career, I was in sales in a job that I thought was the worst job in the world when I graduated out of my MBA school, right, with a finance degree. And I thought, who would get into sales? And at the end, I realized sales is the best job in the world. I'd tell any young person coming out of school, if you want to make some money and really learn how a business works, and because a business works around customers, then go into sales. Well, why would I go into sales? I said, it's the best job in the world. If you'd like to be independent and you feel like you want to have a lot of different experiences, sales is the game. And my daughter, actually, she's 30 years old. She's in the sales business and in SaaS software also, and she's done just fantastically. And so I think I came almost 360 in my view of the world. That sales is bad. I think now sales is just the best job in the world.
Is that why, one of the things that I think so, and this, and you've seen this with tech companies, especially startups, revenue, sales, whatever, it's that negative, like, I don't want to do this. Maybe we can invent technology, digital marketing, so on and so forth, where we don't have to, we can almost automate that, but we forget that it's, especially with larger accounts, it's person to person.
It is. It's impossible, in my opinion. The thing that I think in the beginning that enabled us to grow so quickly and to get traction was in that vertical market, which is landscape management, ice and snow management, and construction management, right? We built the software that essentially was a business management ERP platform that did everything from CRM all the way through to invoicing, production, scheduling in between, all that type of stuff. And I had been in that same space consulting before starting a software company, so I had lots of relationships that were pretty deep, and that helped us significantly. And I guess my point is relationships matter in sales still today, no matter what you're selling. And if people trust you, they're going to buy from you. And fortunately, those relationships helped us at Aspire grow because people knew me already. They knew Kevin was a guy who was going to deliver. If he says it's going to work, go buy it. And the joke around Aspire in the early years was we were not selling software. Kevin was selling vaporware, literally just a promise that it would do something. And we sold a lot of software before he actually brought out the first working system.
That's amazing, because so many, you see this over and over and over again, especially in the tech side of things, where there's this idea and you have venture capitalists that are banking on an idea. But I watched a presentation the other day with some venture capitalists, and they were so focused on, the team, the person, and that attitude that they have and the philosophy that they have, and then, always trying to pick a unicorn, that type of thing. But do you view, before we get back to your timeline, do you view your success? What percentage of your success do you think it is off the relationships and sales?
In the early years, I would say certainly the majority. Later on, the product, as you get out of, in our case, my circle of relationships, and you grow to the full extent of the industry, those people didn't know me from Adam. And I think after that, the product really starts to matter. But it also has to matter in the sense that by the time, they're not the early adopters. Right? If you look at the product life cycle curve, they're up at the top. Now, I haven't adopted early. I'm at the top. And their decision at the top of that product life cycle really is, did it work for other people? And so they're buying not often by advertising, but more word of mouth, especially in a lot of these vertical markets like landscape management, snow and ice and construction. A lot of the contractor verticals I've found, at least, they're joiners, right? They're in associations, national and local, so they're always talking to each other. And that word of mouth, at some point, is really based on product performance. Does it work as promised? Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, you can make all the promises in the world, but if your product can't deliver, then you're shit out of luck on that. Question I have though, and I see this with entrepreneurs all the time, is this pattern of being willing to move, being willing to get out of your comfort zone and move to a whole different state, move to a whole different country. Before we get in Japan, I want to get into Florida. What made you go from New York and then make a decision to go to Florida?
Terrible weather in New York. True. I hate winter. It took me 23 years to figure that out, but I just decided I hated winter. And in the book, I tell the story about coming out of the restaurant where I was managing, and my car was literally frozen to the pavement. And I thought there must be a better way to live than this. And so I made a decision to say, I'm going somewhere where it's warm. And I went out and purchased a motorcycle about a month later, gave my notice, and then my friend and I, we just got on the bikes and drove down to Florida, stopped at a place, and I ended up there almost 2 years in Florida before the humidity drove me out of the state.
It's amazing, though, and you have this entrepreneurial spirit, and you've proven it, done that, got the T-shirt. What you call the one-hit wonder. I mean, your company hit and you're semi-retired and in Scottsdale, Arizona, where you're able to live there and there's no winters at all. But this idea of people being literally, I'm going to use the word, frozen and not being able to move or not being able to make decisions on the fly or, have the courage. What do you think because I always see entrepreneurs and you see this pattern over and again. What do you think caused you to be able to just say, I'm going to go to Florida or I'm going to go to Japan? What was in you in those moments?
Well, I certainly like variation. That's been proven. I was always open to new adventures, even as a kid. I would get myself in trouble doing things like that. And I don't know. I think I just liked new things, and I never really had a fear of, what's going to go wrong if you go there. I thought, well, if I go there and it goes wrong, I'll figure it out, right? You scrap. And so some of it is you just believe in your own survival skills, I think, as a person. Right. I think the other is, in my case, I didn't have a plan of who or what I wanted to be growing up. And so there was nothing I was staked to, if you know what I mean, that kept me at home or kept me in a place. And so I was willing to go on to the next thing and say, well, let's see how that works. And so I think those two things played a big part of it.
Now, I noticed that through 1980s and 83, you got 2 MBAs. You got one at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, and then Arizona State University, Thunderbird School of Global Management. And you got an international management, which I thought was amazing. What do you think led you to get 2 MBAs, and what do you think the process of getting education? Because I see so many people now, either downplaying college or saying, I don't need that. What did education do to you personally, and how did it help you as an entrepreneur?
First of all, it was only one MBA and one MIM called the Masters in International Management. That was at ASU.
Oh, so, okay.
Just one MBA. I think back then, school was a bit different, at least in my estimation, in how it was taught, etc. So I can see my daughter never finished college, and she does quite well in sales and in the tech business. And so I really, without getting off on a weird conversation, I really think that a lot of the universities really have to look hard at what they're teaching,
right?
Because as a person who hires, I can tell you a lot of people that we hired coming in at that age group were almost skillless in a lot of things.
Yes.
In other words, their degree that they brought to the table really didn't help them, and it wasn't even what we interviewed for. We interviewed more for chemistry and some native ability to fit in with our culture at Aspire, which, that culture was, get in, take a risk, do some stuff. You're not going to get a lot of hand holding. And so people who fit that kind of culture did well. In my MBA program, I think it did 2 things. And I just wrote an article on this today, Jason, and submitted it. Was there are only two courses in my MBA program that I felt like I ever used over my career. Number one was Accounting 101. Where does money go in a business? And if you can't understand that, I don't know how you can manage anything.
Right.
Number 2 was a course called Organizational Behavior, and essentially it was about dealing with people. And both of those were super valuable to me because it opened my eyes up to what business was really about. So I really knew nothing. I had been a restaurant manager, but that's really a hand-holding babysitting job for the most part. Been a bartender, and so learning that stuff helped. And the other thing about an MBA was it opened you up to a whole new network of people you never would have known if you hadn't gone to that school and that program. Right? That really, those 3 things, those 2 courses and opening up that network, I think, really made a difference for me in terms of, how I got to where I got.
Yeah, and it's amazing. I mean, you go from here it is, it's Florida to Dallas to Arizona State, and then in 1983, you decide to go to Japan. Tell me a little bit about that. And I know you wrote a few chapters in the book about it, but kind of some crazy things. Can you tell the guests a little bit about Japan?
If you recall, back in those days, the Japanese manufacturing, total quality management was all the rage.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The Japanese were beating the U.S. manufacturers to death in production and especially quality. The auto business was, one of those businesses. And so I got interested in that, reading it. And the program I was at, Thunderbird School, they had a exchange program where 5 Japanese guys would come over to the U.S. and 5 of us would go over there. And I signed up and enrolled in that, and I got selected. And spent almost 6 months over there in school, doing classwork, learning the language to the extent I could learn Japanese language, and, seeing an entirely different culture and world that I hadn't seen before. And by the time it was over, I was really happy to come home. If anyone who's spent a lot of time, at least in my case, in a place like Japan, it's almost overwhelming. It's so not America in a way, if that makes sense. That it's really hard to get used to in some ways, and you really start missing a lot of things about home. And as much as I enjoyed it, I was really happy to get home. I learned a lot over there about things. And I was going to look for a job in international, but it never really happened. And so it just turned out to be a good, fun experience.
Yeah. And then you began to work for a large national accounting firm, and then you work for several smaller consulting companies. And then, we fast forward to 1992. And this is where you launch your career, and you use the words gun for hire. But, and maybe you can explain that, but you all these jobs, I'm seeing security. In each of these, I see this national accounting firm, there's security, several smaller consulting companies. Obviously, you did well at consulting. There's security there. What led you to the point to say, you know what? It's 1992. I feel like I'm ready. I'm going to be an entrepreneur. Or did you feel like you're ready? It's just something that you decided to do on a whim?
What happened at that time was I was going through a divorce, and I had a young daughter about 2 years old. And anyone who's gone through divorce with kids knows it's not a pretty business. And people's feelings are hurt, and kids can become, political footballs or whatever you might call it in that battle between, the now splitting partners. And so my lawyer said, listen, you're not going to get to see your kid more than every other weekend and maybe a Wednesday visitation. I said, that's not going to work for me. I said, I want at least half, right? I think that was fair. And he goes, well, you can't be going to work and traveling like you're traveling. So I said, you know what? Then I'll quit my job. And so I went in and quit my job, and I was able to tell the judge that I was home and I was freelancing and making money, and so I could raise my daughter and be there. She was young. She was 3 years old, and I could do that. And so I ended up succeeding. I ended up getting 50% custody. I actually became the primary parent for my daughter, and that became my real job for the next 10 years. It was raising my daughter. At the same time, I did start up my consulting firm. And so when people ask me about it, I say, there really was no big leap. I almost was forced into doing it, that this was my best choice. And so tactically, I was working for a consulting firm. And when you're with a consulting firm, even though you work for the firm, the clients they're like yours. They know you. They didn't hire Coopers and Lybrand. They did, but really they work with Kevin. And so we want Kevin. And so I made a deal with 3 of my clients at that company. And my boss wasn't very excited about this. But I said, listen, I will pay you a percentage of what I bill them in the first year, but this is not a discussion. I'm leaving because my daughter's more important than my work at the moment. And so that's why I got into that business. And then I learned rather quickly that making a living as a consultant is not easy.
Right.
People who get in that world who are really good at the doing part don't survive very long, because minimum half your time, at least in my case, is spent selling the next job. And so if you don't like the sales, then you're really going to have a hard time being a consultant, because it's such a fundamental piece of what you do. And so I finally realized that and got that. And the other thing I realized, which I took with me forever, is specialization. And I decided that I would specialize in one industry. I became a big fish in a small pond. Everyone knows me. I've been published in that industry, and even better is you know everything about it. So when you get in there as a consultant, you're super valuable to them, and that's what they want. That's why they hire you. And instead of trying to be a generalist, which I think is the kiss of death as a consultant, and not liking to sell, I was able to make a pretty good consulting career for over 20 years with really those two concepts: good at selling and focus on one particular industry.
Yeah, I know, that's amazing. As a consultant, I mean, what are the percentages of spending 20 years as an entrepreneur with your own consulting company? I mean, that has to be like 0.01%.
Yeah, I think it's really, really low to make it happen. And because what goes along with it is this road warrior lifestyle.
Right.
I mean, by the time I was finishing, I was on an airplane 35 to 40 weeks a year traveling. You know, after my daughter was out of high school, my last couple of years, that was kind of my wife referred to me as her weekend husband. Because, you know, along with that becomes this pretty rigorous road warrior, hotel, airport kind of living, and it's not for everybody.
Yeah, I could imagine, and the amount of hours that you have to put in. This is something that, not necessarily controversial, but something that I like to share with entrepreneurs, is it, no matter who you are, and I know, you know, this was 1993, so, you know, fairly young entrepreneur when you did this, but it's this whole idea of, you know, I can work 25 part-time, I can work 30 hours a week and grow a successful business. I mean, in this beginning phases of Kehoe and Company, how many hours were you working a week?
Cool. 60, 70.
Yeah, exactly. I've never met a successful entrepreneur that's worked less than 40 hours a week.
7 days a week often. Yeah, it was my life. Yeah, for sure. You know, to get it launched. And I think really if I look back and I'm honest about it, it really didn't become a stable, reliable cash producing business until like year 6 or 7.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's that longevity when you started really making revenue and
right. In
systems.
other words, I was able to have constant clients. You know, I had a constant level of work coming in and leads. And so, you know, it became a virtuous cycle of do good work. People will call you. You'll get more work.
Yeah. And this to me, I think is so important. Because I have a lot of young entrepreneurs that listen to my show. And this is something that whenever I talk with them that they miss the boat on, and I kind of am frank with them. It's like, if you want to work 40 hours or less a week, be a great manager at another company, at something that's stable. But if you're going to start something brand new, you know, and I always use the locomotive, when you have to put coal in that cold locomotive, it takes a lot of energy to get it going. Once it's going that 6th or 7th year, then you're just putting coal in it to keep it, you know, going. But it's this whole idea of, you know, I can do everything online, or I can just plug and play. Because if it was that simple, everybody would be an entrepreneur. What do you think?
Everyone would do it.
So, you know, I know you talked about sales. I know you talked about continuously selling. I want to hit this theme before we move on to the software company, but with Kehoe and Company. On the sales side of things, is it you being in front of customers constantly? And are these like, I know you were a big fish in a small pond, and you were known as an expert, a thought leader, that they call it thought leader marketing now, you know, and that's what you would be, you know, in those days. Were they calling you and saying, hey, when can you show up type of a thing? We have a problem. You know, what do you think the success was in that avenue?
You know, by the time I was in year 15, it was getting to be more like that, what you just said. But before then, it was number one, speaking. I would speak at conferences all the time, all over. That was related to the industry, and I would publish. I had a column for 22 years in one of the magazines, and I would publish. And I published, my style was to publish really practical advice with good, solid examples, not theoretical technical stuff. And that was always my MO, that when you hired Kehoe, I mean, you got down into the nitty gritty and you got the details and stuff, not a theory. And so when I worked with clients, I never wrote reports and said, do this. I went in, did analysis, and we fixed stuff that day, which is the great thing about working with small cap companies, is you're working with the owner and a relatively small management team. There's very little politics, which I despise, and you get things done. I mean, the decisions you make today are implemented that afternoon. And if you had good chemistry with the owner, which in some cases I did, in some cases I did not. I mean, it really pleases me to say that many of my clients, even to today, they're friends. I mean, I've vacationed with them. I know where they are, their kids, etc. Just because of the nature of working in a small cap company where you can have a really immediate impact. And I really enjoyed that part of things. And I think that actually helped quite a bit when I morphed or moved on to the software company, really understanding what happens at a transactional level inside an organization, and then turning that into a piece of software that can help someone run their company.
That's amazing, though, that you would get to this level after 15 years, be, this expert, and then turn around and say, you know what, it's 2014. I've been doing this since 1993. I'm going to do an Aspire software company. I'm going to found this software company. Where did that transition? Because most people would just be happy. Like, I mean, you made it. You had your own company. You're doing well. You're sought after. People are looking for you in that specific industry. You have all these wonderful friends in this industry that you're vacationing with. What was this transition? Was there something that happened in your life, personally? What caused you to say, hey, did it just lead organically into the software company? What was that transition like?
There at the time were not a lot of good software products in the vertical. And about that same time, the tech, and I'm not the tech person, but the big tech revolution was applications on mobile devices. The iPhones and other things become much more capable, and then cloud data management. Right, those two things really did not exist in any way, shape, or form in the industry I was in 2014. And a fellow I knew who wrote and managed the software in the industry was trying to buy out his partners and take the product he had and take it and grow it and scale it. But he didn't have the money to buy out the partners. So he called me and he gave me a number, and I said, you know what? I will write that check, but I want 50% of the business. And so we agreed to that. In the end, his partners bought him out, fired him, kicked him out the door. And we were left with, okay, what do we do now? And the only answer was we start from scratch, raise capital, and build a brand new product. A promise is a promise, and you can't be a consultant and start a software company at the same time.
Right.
You can't do it. There's no time. And interestingly enough, two other things happened at the same time. One was not spontaneous, but it was shocking. I got diagnosed with cancer in 2014. And the other was I was a little burnt out on consulting. So, all those things conspired, if you will, together to make that leap. And we went out and raised a pretty significant amount of capital. And ultimately, we rewarded our investors very handsomely, which is one of the great, how would you say, one of the great pleasures or experiences of my life is people who gave me money and trusted me, I returned it.
That's awesome.
That makes me happy. Yeah.
Yeah. But this is 2014. You're having to do away with the consulting company. You're starting this software company. This isn't just I had something on my leg or my arm, and I went to the doctor and they took the cancer off. This is stage 4. So
Yeah.
this is pretty serious. Do you think it was the burnout, or was it just, a lot in life? I think 1 in 4 people, or we all have cancer inside of our systems. What do you think led up to that moment where you're looking at, trying to start a software company and get stage 4? This has to be frightening.
It was, and it wasn't. I'm still here 8 years later, and I still have cancer. I'm still fighting it. I can't plan more than really 90 days in advance anymore, because God knows what the next set of scans is going to show. Right, it could change my life, as it did last year, when it all came back, and then another year is completely lost. In some ways, and it's odd to say this, that I don't know, maybe God works in weird, wonderful ways, but there was no way I could have continued consulting. Right? The treatments are just too much. However, I was able to do sales and do online demonstrations and do meetings and all those types of things, in between treatments. I did it in car rides up to radiation. I did it from hospital beds. I did it everywhere. And in a way, I'm glad I had it. Number one, it gave me something to do. It took my mind off of what was going on around, right?
Right.
Which was all these terrible treatments. And that was great. And number two, I didn't take a salary for the first 2.5 years. And so it wasn't so much that I didn't have money, because we had done well all those other prior years. But I couldn't have gotten on an airplane. I couldn't have traveled. I couldn't have done all the stuff. For those who've done consulting, you know how intensive it is when
Right.
you go to someone's, office. You think it's an 8-hour day. It's not an 8-hour day. It's a 12-hour day. They want to drain your brain through dinner, right? Then you run to an airplane. You go to the next person. It's exhausting, and it can be. And so I think in some ways, it was. The cancer is terrible, but Aspire saved my life a little bit. It gave me something to do and something to focus on. And it was an odd experience. Still is a little bit.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine. I can't imagine. I'm 48, but I couldn't imagine doing sales calls on the way to an appointment for radiation treatment. That your drive and ambition is admirable, and to be able to build a software company that you're going to sell in 2018, half of it, and to be able to grow that. What type of drive did that take? What are you at, 20% health wise, 30% when you're going to these treatments? I've heard and had friends and people that I know. I could not have imagined. This is so inspiring to those, because we have so little gratitude for our health, and we just take it for granted and eat whatever we want. And I know you could, and I want you to talk about this, but we don't even think about this. And then we're at 100%, and yet we're giving 50%. Here you are at, 20, 30, 40%, and you're giving 100%. How were you able to do that?
I felt I was excited, first of all, about trying to succeed with what we were doing. Number two, I had other people's money. I did not want to let them down. Number three, I didn't want to let the rest of the people down in my company. And I think those things certainly were on my mind all the time. And there were times where I'd be gone a week, right? I just couldn't function. But I'd come back the next week, and I'd get back to work, and I think if I didn't have that in the back of my mind, it's really easy to dawdle and feel bad for yourself for 2 weeks instead of saying, okay, enough, 1 week, let's get back to work. And that's kind of how I did it. When I was really physically kind of incapable, I just shut down. And then as soon as I sort of got back, like you said, 30, 40, 50%, I just go, okay, enough. Let's get up and let's get going. And that's kind of how it went until I finally got into some level of, wasn't really remission, but stasis in the cancer. It was there, but it was doing nothing. It wasn't growing. It wasn't metastasizing anymore. And, into the end of 17 and 18, I really had pretty 2 good years where my treatments were minimal. Right? I didn't have to do as many. And so, I didn't have as many things interfering like I did in 14, 15, and 16.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, it shows a testament to your courage and to you as a person. And because I think most people would just, I don't even know. I haven't experienced that much adversity in my life, but I especially nowadays, and I want the younger generation to hear this, is like, most people just fold. They just put their cards in, and this service.
Don't believe me. I had moments.
But this desire to serve others, and this responsibility that you felt for others when you could be so narcissistic and make it all about you, that's what's admirable to me, and that's amazing. And so 2018 hits, and you have an opportunity. Somebody comes in and they want to buy the company.
We, meaning my partner and I guess he was and I was at the same time getting a lot of emails from private equity companies. And, an email would say, hey, you guys look like you're doing great stuff. We'd love to talk with you. This is what we do. And they started coming, and then they started coming like almost every day.
Wow.
And I asked my partner one day, I said, are you getting these emails? And he goes, yeah. And I looked at him, I said, who the hell would want to buy us? And I don't understand. And so I said, you know what? Would you mind if I just replied to one? He goes, go ahead. And that opened the door, right? We ended up interviewing 6, 7 PE companies. And believe me, by the time I got down to the last 3, I think I mentioned this in the book, the way they wine and dine you and butter you up. I mean, it's unbelievable sales pitch. You're great. You're going to do this. We're going here. And then they start putting numbers and valuations on the table, and you can hardly believe what you're hearing. And so ultimately, we agreed that we would sell controlling interest in the company. And my partner, he's younger than I think he's 50 now or 51 now. I'm 67. I said, listen, I'm in a very different place than you. I mean, I'm closer to retirement, and cashing out some of my chips would be great. I said, I don't think it's a bad idea for you either. And so ultimately we did. We ended up cashing out. I think I owned 30% at the time. And after the first deal, I owned 15%. And so, as it turned out, I think we're in the right place at the right time. The valuations in SaaS software were astronomical, 2018 to 21, and I think we benefited from that, as did our investors.
What do you think is, I can already tell just by going through your life and seeing all this amazing entrepreneurial spirit that you had, but not just to get woo-woo in that scenario. What do you think led to that point for you and your partner to be able to say, you know what, these evaluations are crazy, we're cashing out? I mean, do you think it was your hard work? Do you think it was your sales ability like you did? I mean, obviously you grew the consulting firm, you did that amazingly enough to provide for you and make a great income. What do you think was those key factors in you being able to sell and to have such a success at the end?
Well, I mean, I think it certainly was hard work. I think our company was positionally in the market in a very good spot. So from someone on the outside looking in, it had a lot of runway left for growth. And, he and I what did we know about scaling a business from, I think we're doing 8 or 9 million at the time, to, 70, 80, 90 million. I mean, I had never done that. He had never done that. And so it made some sense to say, let's be smart about this and let's bring in some people who understand how to do that and can bring to the table
Yes.
some of the competencies and the connections and other things you need to do that without making a ton of mistakes. Because when you start up, you got nothing to lose. I mean, you do, your investors' money, obviously, but it's nothing like when you get to that level and you make a mistake. I mean, now you have a lot to lose. And so, the risk profile is quite different from startup to where you're really going into launch mode, and trying to take the rocket from Earth orbit to the moon, which essentially was what the whole game's about with these guys.
Yeah, that's amazing. And now you're are you retired or semi-retired now?
I am. Yes, I'm like a lot of entrepreneurs. When they cash you out, they kind of want to put you up in pasture, and they kind of did that. And I wasn't adverse to it. So.
Yeah. Now I know 2021. You had mentioned that you're still battling with cancer. What aspirations do you have now? Are you just enjoying life and spending time and your primary focus is family through all this hard work, 6-7 days a week? What does life look like now for you, Kevin?
My wife said I was her weekend husband, and now we've spent like 2.5 years like in the same place all the time, and amazingly, we get along better, which doesn't always happen, I understand.
Right.
So I enjoy spending time with her. I wrote a book. I'd like to write another. I'd like to actually sell more of these books. And I like doing this, what we're doing right now. Being interviewed, talking to people, staying engaged that way. I really enjoy that. We cashed out pretty well, as I said. And so I've started a charitable foundation. And I've engaged 2 of my siblings and their children because we want to make it multi-generational, where my daughter eventually takes over, and then her kids and other cousins of that age take over. And so we've spent a fair amount of time getting the foundation up and running, and we are giving money away. We're active in doing that. And that takes time to go do that. My daughter's getting married. I'm engaged in her life a lot. I only have one. And, and I'm trying to play a little golf. And frankly, Jason, the cancer takes a lot of time, man. A lot in the last 18 months. It becomes your life. And fortunately, it hasn't been awful in the last 2 months. But, last year we were at the hospital or the doctor sometimes 4 days a week doing things, right?
Right.
Not fun. And so now it's a little bit better. We just finished a first in humans trial with a new immunotherapy. We don't know where we stand yet in terms of efficacy or progress result on that yet. So, but we're hopeful, that the cancer world is moving from barbaric treatments, and they are barbaric, surgery, radiation, and chemo are barbarism. We're going to look at this stuff 10, 15 years from now and go, that was like bleeding people with leeches and mustard plasters, right?
Right, exactly.
Right, to a world where we're going to use these immuno capabilities, a lot of it driven by computer powered, where you can sequence people's genomes and isolate cancers. Because they're not all the same. I mean, someone gets colorectal cancer like I have, and you think, well, you have colorectal cancer, but there are like 15 different versions because the cancer comes as a result of different mutations in different people with different intensities. And so it's a very interesting kind of thing. And so we're involved in the cancer world still. We go to the Mayo here, and so we're trying to actually get another trial set up here, hopefully this year for some people.
I love that, and I know you've talked about it on LinkedIn and different posts and stuff like that. That you're going to be with your wife till 2045. So for the next 20 for the next 20 plus years. Last question, Kevin. We're getting up on the hour. What does legacy look like to you?
It's important. I think the book is really part of that, which kind of goes to our mission and the foundation. My mission was, my mission was always quite simple, and it still is. It's like wherever you go, whatever place you go to, leave it better than you left it. That's what you can do. And I hope that's my legacy, that when people look back, they'll say, that was one cool dude. Look at some of the crazy stuff he did. That's why I wrote the book, because some of the adventures are like, what an idiot. How could this guy end up doing all these things? And then the other is, what an utterly dependable kind of guy. And that's important to me, to be trustworthy and loyal to people. And ultimately the guy made everything he touched a little bit better. And I hope that's the legacy that, my daughter and her kids and, my nieces and nephews, when they look back and remember Uncle Kevin, that's the kind of guy he was. I've always considered myself an average guy. That's why I put it in the title of the book. And maybe I'll end on this. And my wife thinks I'm a genius. And I say, listen, honey, I couldn't even get 1250 on the SATs and go to an Ivy League school. So I'm not the brightest guy in the shed, but I'll tell you this. I will outwork anyone at any time. And I'm like a dog on your trouser leg. I won't let go. I said, that's how I made myself a success.
Well, you say it as average. I say it at, like your wife would, genius. This is the 0.001% of what happens to entrepreneurs. There's a reason why that percentage is so rare. You could write in the last 20, 30 years, how many companies have come out and been successful and how many fail. We know how that goes. So I commend you. If somebody wants to, Kevin, we'll end on this. If somebody wants to get their book, they want to know more about your foundation, what are the best ways for them to do that?
The book is a website. It's www.onehitwonder.site, SITE. And of course, you can buy the book there. You can read reviews. There's blogs and events and things we do. I mean, ultimately, we'll have, and thank you for having me on, we'll have this wonderful interview posted up there for people to experience and get something out of. And of course, you can just go to Amazon and type in One Hit Wonder. It'll pop right up and you can buy the book there. The foundation, where our website is going to be released pretty soon. It's going to just be the Kehoe Family Foundation.org. So that's how you get in touch with us.
I love it. And I encourage all my listeners, go to onehitwonder.site. That's SITE. Kevin, absolutely pleasure to have you on the ABQ Business Podcast. Truly inspiring story. Want to know more? I want to see what these next 20 years you're going to do with your foundation. Just an amazing story. And I appreciate you being on our podcast today.
Jason, thank you for having me. I really appreciate you having me.
Thank you for joining us on the Albuquerque Business Podcast. Make sure to subscribe and share, and go to abqpodcast.com. Resources and links to everything we talked about today. And business owner.